NFL player terms.
Mysterious world.
They went out and they smelled this rancid smell, and they didn't see anything, but they went to the next where the next trailer was, and all the kittens were gone.
But no one goes there. I mean, they don't log there. They don't very well. It was the first time I ever saw two at one time, but I followed the one, and that's when that happened. With the last time when I got zapped, and I guess that's their way of saying, we don't want you here.
That, that this woman in Texas was murdered.
And other cryptids, and other beings as us, as humans, for example, they're, if we get shot with a 50 caliber, we're, and obviously they come from different star systems.
Acknowledge it because they say they don't have anything to compare it against. Well, if they've got a body, they've got something to compare.
From cryptids, the paranormal, the mystery that remains. What are they?
Happening, you feel this sense of fear, you're being held down, things are being thrown, and I think they try to counteract both that, okay?
Good evening, folks. My name is Chris Fringe. Join us tonight as we discuss the unknown phenomenon in our world that infests it. You're listening to The Venomous Fringe. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Venomous Fringe. You're listening to, of course, the show dedicated to cryptids and paranormal discussion. I'm your host, Chris Fringe. Tonight's show is going to be on the cryptid known as the Mothman. We will be discussing the history of the Mothman, the current day sightings, and as well as discussing on what it could be. We hope you enjoy tonight's show. For all Fringeaholics returning, welcome back. It's great to have you here tonight. And as for newcomers, welcome to the show. We hope you like tonight's episode. We want to go ahead and take a bit of a break from the Dogman discussion and transition into another discussion from another cryptid. And I also think it's pretty good because it'd be nice to take a break from our typical discussions that everyone comes for every day of the week, and transition to something that isn't really explained on the show, and I give my perspective as well as also go into a little bit of history on that specific cryptid. And I think the Mothman is a good start because it's one of my favorite cryptids. It was actually one of the very few that got me into the interest of the field, and plus too, I just love the lore behind it. I mean, you're dealing with a cryptid here that has had been around since the 20th century and has had such a huge impact, I think a bigger impact than Sasquatch at the time when it was first being cited. So there's a specific period of time with this cryptid that was very notorious, and so many just are, I think, blind by it because of the current day topics in the cryptozoology field. And even now, with Sasquatch being a top cryptid, Dogman a top cryptid, El Chupacabras, the Mothman, and Loch Ness, and other mysterious cryptids in the south region of the United States, you have all this gallery of cryptids out there, and Mothman is definitely in the top 5. I think would be in the top 5. You have all these reports from West Virginia, all the way up into Chicago, so you have a specific amount of time in which this creature has been sighted and has been around since the late 60s, and starting in the final months of 66, going all the way up until the last few months of 67, a 13-month time span from November of 66 to December of 67, where this Mothman creature was seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And I even think now for the discussion of the Mothman, I mean, you got the Mothman Festival coming up, one of the biggest festivals for cryptozoology, and then you also have the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, so really, you have such a huge attraction and a huge fascination with this cryptid and how popular it is, especially in that region. And I'll talk a little bit about the Mothman Museum and all that in a little bit, but mostly for tonight's show, we want to just transition into our taking out of the Dogman topics and just talking about the Mothman and going through a brief history of everything, from the first sightings all the way up to now, and of course what it could be. And as we go along, we'll touch base on certain aspects, even origin. So I think it'll be a good, exciting episode. I think you guys will like it. So before we get started, a couple of announcements. As always, guys, thank you for tuning in. If you guys would like to get in contact with me, you can reach me at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. There's going to be a link in the description. That's the email you can reach me at. As well as if you guys would like to join a couple social media groups, we have a few Facebook groups dedicated to Dogman discussion and Dogman creatures only, as well as the official Venomous Fringe group. Guys, we're trying to get that group going. If you guys have social media and you guys would like to check out the group, go right ahead. There's a link in the description. It's a closed group, so both groups are closed, meaning that any information or anything you post will not be public or put on your public profile. So if you do keep a private life with cryptids, this is a closed group. None of what you talk about in this group will be put out there, so anybody on your friends list will see it. And we also have a Discord chat. Feel free to join that as well. A few easy steps how to create an account and whatnot. So guys, please check out those links. We'd love to have you in the groups. And if you guys would like to help support the show, there is a donation link, a PayPal you guys can reach at. If you guys would like to help for the show, whether it's of course for our equipment or for research, we are not doing YouTube's partnership due to the demonetization of all of the other YouTube channels, cryptid related and paranormal, and even non-miscellaneous, of course. And if you guys would like to help support the show and you could help us, that would be the link you can reach us at with that. So with all that being said, let's get into the Mothman. The Mothman is a cryptid reported to resemble the insect moth and the body structure of a man. First reported in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in November of 1966, over the years, thousands of reports have surfaced of the mysterious flying hominid. In December of 1967, the Silver Bridge, a bridge that connected between Point Pleasant and Ohio, collapsed. Eyewitnesses reported seeing the Mothman before the collapse, and since the tragedy, many have questioned if the Mothman is an angel of death, an omen, or some sort of warning sign sent from an unknown realm to warn us of the soon-to-be disasters that be. In the last 53 years, a series of books, a museum, and a festival have been anchored in the pop culture aspect of the creature, with references and minor appearances in cinema, and the main focus of the 2002 motion picture The Mothman Prophecies, based on the 1975 novel of the same name by John Keel. Many describe the Mothman as being over 7 feet to 9 feet tall, weighing over 300 to 500 pounds, having the muscular physique of a bodybuilder, gigantic wings that sprout 22 inches in length and maybe more, but perhaps the most distinct feature of the creature is the mysterious hypnotic red eyes that it possesses. So the general oversight of the creature is really one of that of mystery, and I think like every other cryptid out there that people have decided to do research on, have probably come back and said, well, what is it? And if you had followed my Dogman episode I did a couple weeks ago, you'll note that I myself had honestly admitted that I have no clue what the Dogman is, even though that I have a hypothesis and an opinion. The same will go also for the Mothman, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but really I think any cryptid that we go and run across, whether it's Sasquatch or whether it's a Dogman or Mothman or Chupacabras, I don't think we have a definitive answer on what it is, and which is why it's classified as a cryptid and not a zoological animal that's in our charts. And I always argue about that because it's really the truth, and I think a lot of people dismiss it because there is a difference or there is some sort of type of argument you can play into that, but really it is not an animal in our zoological charts, and if it is, then it will carry similar attributes to your typical animals of its similar genetic nature. In this case, the Mothman could be very much so the case of similarities to that if your typical birds, your eagles, your hawks, your owls. And as silly as one might think, there is also a cryptid out there known as the Owl Man, which is believed to be a relative or at least somewhat of a familiar creature of the Mothman equivalents, and it has been seen in Europe. So you have a few reports of Mothman activity all throughout the world, and right now the biggest activity is in Chicago. There is a map, and Lon Strickler, another researcher, had constructed this map along with another paranormal team, and they together had made a list of Mothman sightings seen in Chicago from the years of 2011 all the way up to now, 2019. I think the latest report I read off this map was from March of 2019, so it was this year. And really, it's amazing because when you look at the type of map and the structure that it possesses, especially one such as that has all of these features very similar to what we see in the Dogman maps that I show, you have an array of encounters that are not too far apart from each other, but have a very mysterious, unknown meaning to why it's being cited in this specific area. And we've argued about that there and there with Dogmen, whether there's some specific territories that these creatures are attracted to. In this case, with the Mothman, what is it about the Chicago region in this area that it's attracted to? Now, in the brief overview I did in that small little vignette that you saw, I mentioned about the whole natural disaster. A lot of people are under the impression that a natural disaster with the Mothman happens and that this creature is sighted before one. There's never been a case where one has been seen after, though that could be debated because I think people have seen them after. And I say them because I believe that there are more than one Mothman, I think, at this point in time, and I could be wrong. There have been several equivalents. I mentioned Owlman. People have argued the Jersey Devil being a Mothman cousin. Another have argued about the Blackbird of Chernobyl, the one that was seen in Russia before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened. You know, you have a lot of different variations of the Mothman that have been reported, or similar flying hominids, but really, I guess you could say you can classify them all as flying hominids. But to go back into it, you have all of these reports of where this creature has been seen before natural disasters, and many have thought that maybe this creature is some sort of omen or some sort of angel of death, has an ability that is seen before disaster. There were reports that this creature was seen on 9/11. And there's a photograph, and I'll show you guys the photograph. It's hard to really make out. I don't believe this is the case, but people believe that the Mothman was seen before 9/11. It was seen the day of 9/11, before the North Tower was struck. And, I mean, you have so many different people going at it with it, but it's one of those things that make you wonder, well, it could be, but at the same time, I mean, could it be something else? And I think for many, though, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that was kind of their mindset after the Silver Bridge collapse, was like, what was this creature? What was this thing? And now all of a sudden, the bridge collapses and it vanishes. So, not to distract us, because I want to get into all the bullet points of whether it's 9/11 or the Chernobyl disaster and all these other Mothman encounters throughout the world. I want to just focus specifically on Point Pleasant right now in the brief history segment of the show, and discuss the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area, this place being the main frontier for not just the Mothman reports, but it was the first reported place located of activity, and this place has a lot of lore behind it. I mean, if you go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia today, you'll notice that there's going to be a Mothman statue, and that he's going to see a Mothman museum. It's curated by Jeff Walmsley. Jeff Walmsley was a resident of Point Pleasant at the time of the Mothman arrays in the late 60s, and Jeff has curated this amazing museum. When you walk right into it, I've never been to it, but I've seen photographs, and it's a very beautiful place. Has a great variety of antiques, too. I mean, you have the first eyewitness reports, you have the police reports, you have all the newspaper clippings of the Mothman. It's incredible. And then you have the Mothman Festival that's hosted down there, and of course it's a huge attraction. And when you go there today as a tourist, you know, you don't know the effects that it was back then in the 60s when people were seeing this thing, and every day there was an encounter, every day there was something going on. And that's where that started. So when you look at Point Pleasant, West Virginia now, you'll never believe how it was back in the 60s when there was a lot of things happening. So I want to get into that, in which this will be our brief discussion on Point Pleasant and the encounters there, the effects of the encounters, no different than Dogman. So Each of these little discussions we're talking about here, I'll put as a timestamp as the pinned comment, so you guys can go to each segment in case you wanted to, listen to half an episode and then pick up where you left off. YouTube's done really well with long shows and picking up where you leave off if you happen to exit the show and save battery life, but I mean, it differs there and there. So when we look at the whole scenario, the encounters that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia back in 1966 were very mysterious and anomaly. And they were mysterious and anomaly for many reasons, because around this time in Point Pleasant, it wasn't just the Mothman that was being seen. You had reports prior of people who were seeing UFOs, mysterious flashing lights in the sky, unbelliness to the UFOs. You were seeing mysterious mist in the woods. You were hearing reports of mysterious people running around, such as the MIBs. The reports of injured cold, who was believed to have been an alien. I know it kind of sounds a little silly for some, that what I just said, but you really got to get the full gist of what's been said, because if you have read John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies, which I have as a copy, you'll only understand why I say it the way I say it like that, because a lot of the stories you read out of this book do detect what has been going on around Point Pleasant around this time. Now, this is pre-November 13th or 14th of 66. This is, of course, before the big sightings became a thing. You had people all throughout this tiny town seeing mysterious things, and there was no explanation. You had a case where a couple of grave diggers who were working the night shift were digging up a hole, and a couple of them happened to see a mysterious thing hover from one tree to the next and indirect fly away, and to which a couple of them never made mention of it until the early reports started coming out of the flying Mothman creature in Point Pleasant. And then you had a report of a guy who was having mysterious interference and infrasound interference signals coming from his television set. He goes outside to see a bunch of two red eyes that look like bicycle reflectors, and his dog go into the cornfield that follows in, and that dog was never seen again. So obviously another case of a missing animal. So you have all this array going on throughout the small town, and you got people who are seeing weird things, and it doesn't help either that there's paranormal activity within the town. A couple of the hotels were haunted. So Point Pleasant had a lot of activity, and then you hear the reports of the Mothman, and then everything becomes full circle, and there seems to be a bit of a curse going on in the town. And at this time in our American history, this was the post-Kennedy assassination. This was the post-Cuban Missile Crisis. So we were entering the peace movement, the hippie era of our American history. So you have people out there who, it's more along the lines of, instead of using guns and nuclear missiles, it was picking up marijuana and getting high, tripping on acid and LSD. So it was a very hard time for not only just American boomers, but also, too, you had people who were being ridiculed for seeing things that they couldn't explain, and that was under the belief that they were under the influence of a narcotic or they were alcoholics. So there was a lot of negative feedback around this time, too. So a lot of the things that were being showcased were kind of a little on the hush-hush as well. So this was a very harsh time, I think, in our American history, and to have the cryptids run around like that, because Bigfoot wasn't really notorious back then. There was a few Bigfoot videos and a few Bigfoot reports in the newspapers, but it wasn't until the reports of the Mothman started coming out that people began to hear these cases of cryptids and what they were, and in this case, the Mothman being one. So you have all of this array of activity, and there's no explanation, there's no brief understanding, there's no logical explanation on what's being seen here. You have all these reports of mysterious paranormal activities, from UFOs to paranormal activity in the hotels and throughout town, mysterious figures walking around, and then you have, in the second or few weeks of November of 66, you have two newlywed couples, you have the Scarberries, and then you have another couple. I don't know their name off the top of my head, so I do apologize. If anybody out there can give me the other couple's name, even though it's not relevant to the portion of the story, that'd be great. And then you have, of course, the setting, the infamous setting that occurred, and that was, of course, the TNT area. Now, this place was originally dubbed the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, and this used to be a place where they stored ammunition during World War II. So this place was abandoned for at least a good 20 to 22 years, to be exact. And the plants were still around. I believe they got rid of all the plants now, so really that place is not what it used to be. One of my connections in Point Pleasant, or at least in the West Virginia area, can give me confirmation on that. But yeah, so you have these two couples who are going out and they're investigating the TNT area, and they look at the place and they don't notice anything at first. It isn't until they actually stop the car and they park it somewhere, and one of the couple sees something, of course, emerge, and one of the other couple, Scarberries, Linda Scarberry, happens to see it as well. And this creature emerges from, I believe, the north plant, and then it emerges down. There's a couple different stories. One is that it emerged from the north plant. It flew from the north plant all the way down to the ground. The other one is that it emerged out of nowhere, and it got its wing caught within some of the wiring that was confided around the plant. So, in any of those two cases, the couples are panicking. The Roger Scarberry, who is driving, pulls the car in reverse. They head out. They go straight up back into the main roads, exiting TNT area and going back across the bridge. The only way to get to the TNT area was if you went across the bridge, and at this time, this was before the Silver Bridge collapse, so really you were kind of taking a bit of a gamble when going through here. So they go out, they escape. Now the crazy thing about this is before they do cross the bridge, they realize this creature's keeping up with them. This creature, they're doing 45 to 55 on the road. This creature's doing 10 times more of that and is keeping up with them, which is what scared them, and what terrified them the most was the fact that this creature was not stopping. Now, reportedly, the Scarberry's car had gotten claw marks on it from above, and even though that there isn't, there's not a photo, I think, that's out there right now that has it. I think it might be in the museum. I might be wrong, that you'll find of that. But in any ways, they get back over the bridge and the Mothman creature vanishes. They go into town, they report it to the authorities go out, they do a small investigation, they find nothing. Reportedly later that night, the Scarberry's home is under attack by a poltergeist activity, paranormal activity, basically cabinets opening, things flying out, everything is basically chaotic. And in the reports, the Mothman was present, seen throughout the house, outside. So you have a case where these two couples see this creature, they don't know what it is, they're speeding off, it catches up with them, and then there's a report, an attack of a poltergeist paranormal activity in one eyewitness couple's house, and it was just pure pandemonium. So you have that report, and that was the first reported encounters, actually. That was the first reported, not technically the first, but the first reported that was documented in the police reports and whatnot. So that was a very scary situation. And then you go and fast forward a couple days later, you have another report not too far away from the TNT area. And this eyewitness report, this is actually one of my favorite Mothman reports. And I like it for a few reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is the fact that this eyewitness had a really good look at the creature. And this creature and her were really close to each other. And it was just a very terrifying experience. And it left this woman traumatized the day she passed. And that's one of the reasons why I really like the case, not for the fear aspect, for the fact that she had a close encounter with this creature. And you speak of how cryptids reportedly, when you're close to them or they're going to hurt you or something. I'll explain more after I explain the story. But basically, this woman, her name was Marcella Bennett. Marcella was with family at the time, and that they were leaving the relative's house, and she had held her daughter. She was bringing her daughter to the car, and she noticed something mysterious, a giant mist, something that looked like it was hovering, but it was asleep, or what she felt was asleep. Instantly, she looks at it. This creature turns, does a complete 180, looks at her, and she's close to this creature. It's not like this, she's not too far from this creature. They're actually, I think, about maybe 30 feet away from each other, so they're really close to one another. And the Mothman creature, you know, it emerges, it begins to get close to her, and then at this point Marcella's in shock. She doesn't know what to do because she's terrified of what she's looking at. She's looking at something she can't explain, and the relatives forcing her to get back into the house. She can't move. She turns around, then drops. She falls to the ground. She's on her child. That's how much fear she was in. This creature doesn't do anything. She has the strength to get back up, but she rushes back into the house, closing all the doors, locking windows, putting curtains, covering the windows. And this creature's just around the area, just stalking the house, and this creature's looking in. And then it vanishes after the authorities are called, and there was like a block party because so many people had seen the police, and then of course they had found out it was the Mothman reports that was there. Now, one of the reasons why I like the story is also because when we speak of cryptids, we think of how these dogmen or these Bigfoot are going to attack. We would think the same with the Mothman. In this case, the Mothman didn't do anything, didn't budge. Now, this isn't something that's not really talked about, and this I kind of think is where it gets criticized, is the fact that the Mothman, even though that this creature I don't think was displaying any intimidating posture, she was not too far from this creature. She was close to it. And you can read her reports, whether it's in the book or whether it's in a Wikipedia, preferably ones that have Mothman archives. You know, you have all of these cases where it's the same thing, where she's close to it and it didn't budge, didn't attack her. You know, this creature could have snatched her and her kid, and it didn't do any of that. So it makes me wonder, did this creature have a sense of morality? Did it have a thought process? Maybe it was like, she has an infant, I'm not going to harm her. She seems like she's innocent, I'm not going to do anything. Either or, and I know that sounds wrong, and I know some of you are going to make a joke about it, but point is, guys, when you think of it scientifically wise, I mean, this creature, can it pick and choose, or was it just simply not a threat? You have Linda Scarberry, who went on record and made mention several times that the Mothman she feels isn't trying to harm humans, it's just trying to communicate with us and trying to figure out what we are. And maybe she's right, maybe she's wrong. One thing I've noticed out of all these Mothman reports is that it appears that the Mothman doesn't seem to target humans. It might be interested in us, but what is its purpose specifically? And that's, I think, the thing that just kind of really snaps us back into a thought of what it could be. So at the end of the day, in the Marcella Bennett case, you know, she had the encounter changed her forever. The encounter reportedly left her so traumatized that she changed her routine forever. You talk about people who've had dogman encounters. Marcella reportedly did not ever go out at night to drive again. She had visions and nightmares of the Mothman. So the Mothman phenomenon, it stays with you. And when we talk about encounters and how people react to them, it's a very terrifying situation. Now, another interesting Mothman report in Point Pleasant at the time of the 60s was the Faye Duet report. Now, this is an interesting eyewitness report, and I love her testimony, and I love what she says about it because of just how honest and open. And she's one of the very few Mothman eyewitnesses who are still alive to tell the case. Faye was just a teenager at the time when she had the encounter, and she and her older siblings were skeptical of the Mothman. They didn't think it was real. I think it was a bunch of bogus. Her older brother had heard the sightings, and he was under the impression and wanted to know if only they can prove it, if it was actually there or not. The reported sighting goes is that they drove to the creature's rumored hiding place known as the TNT area in their 59 Ford truck, and as they drove, the Mothman is said to have appeared and began running beside the car, and that not only were they terrified, but she had a very close encounter face-to-face with the creature through the car window. So this creature is seeing she's looking directly right at it. And there's no other scenario other than that could really get you somewhere and wonder, geez. Her brother had told her not to look at it and that she had caught the glimpses at the corner of her eye. The creature was whitish and sandy, as she said. That it had the features of a human, no beak, the giant red eyes that went up to the point and grabbed her full attention. She didn't see the creature's wings until later, and it did not fly at first, but only it ran. This was the most interesting thing. impressed by the creature's ability to keep up with them as the brother drove up 50 miles per hour. She goes on to say about her sighting that all I could see was the eyes. They were so big, and that other than anything else was its face. It just held you, and that was about all you can say and saw. The eyes was the reddest I've ever seen in my life, and to this day, I've never seen anything that red. In the panic, she had told her younger sister and her younger brother to hide by ducking down in the back seat. Her older brother went as fast as he could around the sharp corner to try and lose the creature, but the beast was simply too fast. It turned along with them and continued to follow. Faye's brother went around another sharp turn and stopped the car sideways on the road. The creature had jumped on the hood of the car and looked at them through the windshield. The creature had leaped on the top of the nearby abandoned factory building at the TNT area. She goes on to say, and I quote, "It jumped on the top of the building and then just turned and sat down and crouched like a gargoyle." Faye also described the creature was amazingly able to leap at the height of a tall building in a single jump without flying. Her brother had gotten out of the car and started throwing rocks and pieces of coal at the creature. Finally, he threw a larger coal chunk and landed by its foot. That's when the Mothman stood up and looked at him, turned sideways, and jumped down on from the roof in the same way it got up. And Faye's brother rushed back to the car and closed the door. They saw the creature spread its wings for the first time and fly off into darkness, leaving the children stunned. Faye described the Mothman by saying, and I quote, "I'd say it's close to 5-6 feet wingspan there, but I know that they were big enough to have to carry something like that the eyes almost took up his whole face. That's why it's so weird. It was the largest part in its face was its eyes." In a recent documentary, she said something that was very interesting, and it stood with me, because really you do not know the explanation or an idea on what these creatures are. In this interesting quote, and I want to share it with you guys, she goes on to say, when asked about what she thought the creature could be some sort of mutation, she said, and I quote, that this was not a mutation, that this was something that was perfectly formed the way it was supposed to be, just like any other thing is. Almost as if even in her own testimony and what she believes that this creature, even though that it is of something of mystery, she herself doesn't know what it is, but it was created for whatever purpose, and it looks the way it is, and it's supposed to be perfectly formed the way it is, just like any other thing is created. It's very interesting and kind of a quote that stays with you. I think it's appropriate, and continuing with our Mothman sightings, I'll read you guys several more sightings. I know a lot of you guys enjoy the sightings discussions, and I'll leave you guys some links to take a look at some of these discussions and eyewitness reports, because a lot of these testimonies are really, really interesting, and I really like going back and reminiscent about the older reports, especially in the 60s, because it was a different time period, and back then so many people had different variations and understandings of what this cryptid was. So let's kickstart back into some sightings in Point Pleasant. There was a report from a woman by the name of Ruth Foster in St. Albans, West Virginia, just outside Charleston. Mrs. Ruth Foster claimed that the Mothman appeared on her front lawn on the evening of November 26th of 1966. It was standing on the lawn beside the porch, she told reporters. It was tall, with big red eyes that popped out of its face. "My husband is 6'1", when this bird looked out about the creature's same height or a little shorter, maybe," she continued to say. She goes on to say, and I quote, "It had a funny little face. I didn't see any beak. All I saw were those big red poppy eyes. I screamed and ran back into the house. My brother-in-law went out to look, but it was gone." Connie Jo Carpenter was a shy, studious girl of 18 from New Haven, West Virginia, and she worked at the local Tiny's Diner and was the niece of reporter Mary Heyer. She claimed to have had an encounter with the Mothman around 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, November 26, 1966. She was driving home from church when she had saw what she had thought at first a large man in a gray standing on the deserted links of the Mason County Golf Course on Route 62. 10-foot wings suddenly unfolded. The thing took off straight up and headed for the car. She goes on to say that those eyes, they were very red once, and they were fixed on me, and I couldn't make my own eyes off of them. She declared that it was wondered I didn't have a wreck. She said that the creature flew directly at her windshield, then veered off and disappeared. Connie stepped on the gas and raced home in hysteria. She locked herself in her bedroom. She says that those eyes, that's all she'd ever say was those eyes. Her boyfriend would later say that she was so upset that she was unable to go to school for several days and required medical attention. She was one of the many Mothman eyewitnesses to suffer from an ailment called keloid conjunctivitis, or eye burn. Her eyes were red, swollen, and itchy, and water coming out of them for 2 weeks afterwards. Miss Carpenter was also one of the few to claim a close look at the Mothman's face. She says that it was horrible, like something out of a science fiction movie. By 2001, the infamous Search for the Mothman documentary was released. She was still unable to talk about it. Her husband had made mention, who was the boyfriend at the time, told the story to try and set the record straight. In the interview, he said that I'd like people just to understand that I'm here to make sure that they don't think she's a kook, because she's not, and what she has said she's seen, she has actually seen. He went on to say that the only thing I have to say is, keep an open mind, because someday it could happen to you. If you try to tell somebody what are you going to do if they laugh at you, or if they call you a kook, that you're imagining that, or you're trying to cause chaos, but it actually did happen. What if, and if's a big question. Very true words, and the keloid conjunctivitis, I apologize if I butchered the term, but basically, some people who have also seen this, I believe Marcella Bennett had this case as well, where their eyes were basically having this eye burn. They were red, swollen, itchy, and basically like allergenic eye sores. And when your allergies happen with your eyes and whatnot, this was what was going on with them. And it was a very traumatic time, because you're dealing with such a huge ray of hysteria going on in this portion of the state. So that was one other encounter. This next report is also of interest because it is another relative. Mrs. Virginia Thomas, the sister of Marcella Bennett, was working in her kitchen deep within the TNT area when she heard a loud squeaking sound she said was unlike anything she had ever heard before in her years there. The best I was and can describe it, as she says, is that it was like a bad fan belt, but much louder. I stepped outside. It seemed to be coming from one of the igloos. Then I saw a huge shadow spreading across the grass. It was just afternoon, so there shouldn't have been any shadow like that. Then this figure appeared. It walked erect like a man, but it was all gray, and it was much bigger than any man I've ever seen. I moved very fast across the field, and then disappeared into the trees. It didn't seem to be walking exactly. It was almost gliding, faster than any man could run. It was hunting season, so I knew it wasn't a hunter. No hunter in his right mind would dress in gray. Around here, they all wear red coats and red caps. It wasn't a bear or anything like that. It really scared me. After her experiences, Mrs. Thomas had been plagued by bad dreams. I see a lot of strange people around the river, she explained. It's like some kind of invasion or something. They come over the bridge in trucks and they pour into the TNT area. We grab the kids and run. I can't figure out what it means. This report was pretty interesting because it was the sister of Marcella Bennett who also suffered for years of bad dreams of the Mothman. And one of the most interesting things about it was the fact that she mentions how there would be these people coming from around the river in trucks and stuff like an invasion. No mention of guns or anything. A lot of people who've had dreams with the Mothman encounters believe that the dreams are supposed to be bad luck or a sixth sense or an omen of something bad going to happen, or that there's something within the area that's going to happen. So there's a lot that really transpires, and it becomes something big. Let's read a few more encounters, then we'll get into some of the curses and mythos of the place, and then transition into Chicago. A report from an elderly businessman claims that he had seen the Mothman standing on his front lawn. He stepped outside to see why his dog was barking and confronted the 6 or 7 foot tall gray apparition with flaming eyes. He stood transfixed for several minutes, unaware of the passage of time. Suddenly the creature flew off and staggered back into his house. The individual himself staggered back. He was so pale and shaken his wife thought that he was having a heart attack. The story was later told in the Mothman Prophecies and told once more in Mothman and Other Curious Encounters by Lauren Coleman. Coleman had written that the elderly businessman in Point Pleasant saw the Mothman standing on his front lawn in a full sight one night. Noted that the creature was over 6 feet tall, gray, and endowed with flaming eyes. As he watched, the Birdman flew off some like gray gargoyle out of a grade B science fiction movie. May 19th, 1967, 2 women swore they saw the Mothman fly to meet a UFO on that night. The flying hominid with glowing red eyes approached the hovering luminous object and disappeared. They say that, I quote, that we were driving past the TNT area on Route 62 around 10:30 p.m. when we saw the 2 bright eyes on a shadowy form high into a tree just off the road, and suddenly this big red light appeared and approached that tree. The form rose up towards it and disappeared. Then the big light took off into the north. Well, that's basically all the sightings we'll talk about. I'll leave you guys a link if you want to look at some other sightings. Very good things to take a look at, guys. Very interesting reports, but I felt that those were some nice ones to read at you guys for a little bit for nostalgia purposes. But I want to talk a little bit about the Silver Bridge. The Silver Bridge collapse that happened on December 15th of 1967. It's definitely before 9/11 and before further tragedies in Polked. I mean, literally, this tragedy happened, obviously, beforehand. The Kennedy assassination was big, and around this time, the Cuban Missile Crisis, too, the fallout of that, so you have a couple of years shut off here, and a lot of Americans were not really anticipated for this, because it was deemed to be tragic, and I'll read you guys the full syllabus, and let me know what you guys think, because it's a very interesting case, and one that I think stands out for many. Here we go. The main street in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, led straight onto an I-bar chain-style suspension bridge named the Silver Bridge, based on its aluminum paint that went across the Ohio River in Gallipolis, Ohio. The bridge was built in 1928. Locals would cross it on a daily basis, sometimes several times a day. At 5:05 p.m. on December 15th, 1967, exactly 13 months after the first sightings of the Mothman, the bridge was full of cars, many of them Christmas shoppers, when suddenly it began to shake. They heard the low moaning of metal and then a loud screech. Mary Heyer was a newspaper reporter who wrote the articles about the Mothman and was a close friend of John Keel, the writer of the Mothman Prophecies. They teamed up to interview the witnesses of the Mothman, and on November 19th, 1967, she told Keel that she had a terrible nightmare. They were full of people drowning in the river and Christmas packages were floating everywhere in the water. It was like something awful was going to happen. When Keel returned to Point Pleasant around Thanksgiving of 67, the people in the area were having bad dreams, nightmares about a coming disaster. Virginia Thomas had them about people dying in the water off the nearby Ohio River. In an interview, the bridge collapse survivor Charlene Wood said that when I got to the traffic light here in Point Pleasant, I got the red light. When it changed, I started going up onto the bridge, and just about that time the bridge started shaking. I heard a loud noise, and throughout that a boat had hit into the bridge underneath. She reversed her vehicle as the bridge began folding inward on itself when her tire stopped on the ledge where it broke off. The bridge collapsed into the water below. 46 people died, 9 were injured, and 2 victims were never found, making it the worst bridge accident in American history at the time. For days, rescue workers pulled smashed cars and bodies from the river. Debris littered the water. The tragedy had happened on the coldest day of the year. The Department of Transportation conducted a detailed investigation of the collapse had found the cause to be a 0.1-inch, 2.5mm deep defect of the 13th steel pin-eye bar on the bridge that was improperly manufactured at the time of its conception. The Silver Bridge was also nearly 40 years old, poorly maintained, and for many years had been carrying far more traffic than it was designed for. The Silver Bridge was later replaced by the Silver Memorial Bridge, which was completed only 2 years later. The historical event of the Silver Bridge collapse impacted the Mothman urban legend. With the town busy grieving and mourning their loved ones, they no longer gave their attention to the creature sightings. The Mothman seemed to vanish, and that there were no more sightings at the time. With all of the sightings happening around November 15th of 1966 to December 15th of 1967, and then suddenly stopping, it seemed as if it was all building towards this event. A couple of sightings of Mothman were said to have occurred near the bridge before the incident. Rumors eventually spread that the bridge collapse was connected to the Mothman in some way, that he could be a warning or a dark premonition. This was the beginning of the Mothman being associated with an omen of doom. The Mothman eventually began being reported seen all over the world before tragedy struck, and the creature went from the small-town folklore to global monster icon. So you have a bridge that was poorly designed, and this was designed in 1928, so nearly 40 years, and of course after poor maintenance collapsed due to this defect, this eye-bar, and it killed 46, and as a result, with several bodies missing and never found, and all of this was leading towards this mysterious premonition, or people who believe, people who are under the impression that the Mothman is some sort of dark premonition, here to warn us on ongoing tragedy. So, it makes you wonder, in the tragedies that span of the Mothman, that is there some sort of interdimensional supernatural connection, that why this creature chooses to see itself, and why people choose to see it the way it is formed. Is there some sort of emotional connection? Is there something out there that, of course, you could say is that of a Mothman or a cryptid or something, that one would be like, is this thing a tragedy? Is this thing here to warn us? Are we doomed? Should we be afraid? All the things you'd hear about the Mothman, or at least all the things you'd hear. And we'll talk about the whole omen and the whole premonition stuff in a little bit. But I want to take a look real quick, before we transition to Chicago, on what could be the start of the Mothman legend, where it all began with this one specific figure. And I did not mention his name prior. There was a report of him, but I want to mention him now. And that is, of course, Chief Cornstalk. And Chief Cornstalk, often dubbed as Fighting Chief Cornstalk, born in 1720, was the prominent leader of the Shawnee Nation prior to the American Revolution in 1775 to 1783. His name, and I apologize for the poor pronunciation, Hokolesqua, translates loosely to stalk of corn in English, and spelled Kolsqua in some accounts. He was also known for his Kwai Tai Kwa and Wine Pew Chiskia. My apologies again, of course, for the pronunciations of these terms. Cornstalk opposed of European settlement Westerners of the Ohio River in his youth, but later he became an advocate for peace after the Battle of Point Pleasant in 1774. His murder by the American militiamen at the Fort Randolph during a diplomatic visit in 77 outraged both American Indians and Virginians. Some claim that he spoke of a curse on the land just before he died, but there is no way to verify it. Many connect this to the legendary Mothman creature. Bob Roach, who also built the Mothman statue, built the statue of Cornstalk that is located in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The early years of Cornstalk, historians believe that he may have been born in the present-day Pennsylvania with his sister Nonhelema, moved to the Ohio County near present-day Chickasaw, when the Shawnee fell back before expanding white settlement. The stories tell of Cornstalk's participation in the French and Indian Wars from 1754 to 1763. Though these are probably apocryphal, his alleged participation in the Pontiac's Rebellion from 1763 to 1766 is also unverified, though he did take part in the peace negotiations. During Dunmore's War, Cornstalk played a central role. After the 1768 Treaty of the Fort St. Wicks, settlers and land speculators moved into the land south of the Ohio River in the present-day Kentucky. Although the Iroquois had agreed to cede the land, the Shawnee and others had not been present at the Fort Stanwix negotiations. They still claimed Kentucky as their hunting grounds, and clashes soon took place over this, as Cornstalk tried to unsuccessfully prevent escalation of the hostilities. Attempting to block a Virginian invasion to the Ohio country, Cornstalk led a force of Shawnee and Mingo warriors at the Battle of Point Pleasant. His attack, although ferociously made, was beaten back by the Virginians. Cornstalk later retreated and would reluctantly accept the Ohio River as a boundary of the Shawnee lands of the Treaty of Camp Charlotte. Cornstalk's commanding presence often impressed the American colonels. Virginia officer Colonel Benjamin Wilson wrote of Cornstalk's speech to Lord Dunmore at the Camp Charlotte in 1774. But during the American Revolution, Cornstalk worked to keep his people neutral. He represented the Shawnee at the treaty councils from the Fort Pitt in 1775 and 1776, the first Indian treaties ever negotiated by the U.S. Many Shawnees nevertheless hoped to use the British aid to reclaim their lands lost by the settlers. By the winter of 1776, the Shawnee were effectively divided into a neutral faction led by Cornstalk, militia bands led by men such as, effectively, the Blue Jackets. By the fall of 1777, Cornstalk made a diplomatic visit to Fort Randolph, an American fort at present-day Point Pleasant, seeking as to maintain his faction's neutrality. Cornstalk was detained by the fort commander, who had decided on his own initiative to take hostage any Shawnees who fell into his hands. When on November 10th an American militiaman from the fort was killed nearby by unknown Indians, angry soldiers brutally executed Cornstalk, his son, Elinin Piskio, and 2 other Shawnees. American political and military leaders were alarmed by the murder of Cornstalk, and they believed that he was their only hope in securing the Shawnee neutrality. At the instance of Patrick Henry, then governor of Virginia, Cornstalk's killers, whom Henry called vile assassins, were eventually brought to trial, and since then their fellow soldiers would not testify against them. All were acquitted. The legacy and the curse of the Cornstalk legend. In the 1840, Cornstalk's grave was rediscovered and his remains were moved to the Mason County Courthouse grounds. In 1954, the courthouse was torn down and he was reburied in Point Pleasant. Local legend claims that he took his revenge in the 1960s by sending the mysterious Mothman to terrorize Point Pleasant's heartland. Legends arose about his dying curse being the cause of misfortunes in the area, and lore has it that Cornstalk spoke, saying, "I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son, and for this may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature, and may it even be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of its peoples be paralyzed by the stain of our blood." This event, later supplemented by the local Mothman stories, though no contemporary historical source mentions any such utterance of Cornstalk. Reportedly debunked, though, in Rosemary Ellen Gulney's Monsters of the West Virginia book, published in 2012, makes mention that it is said that the curse was debunked as a fiction as an outdoor play written in the early 20th century, presented at Point Pleasant. The book goes on to say that a man taken by surprise and shot multiple times at point-blank range, who was not killed instantly, probably would not be able to muster such consciousness or anything in his final moments, let alone the dramatic pronouncement. Still, some believe that the fictional play could be based on an already existing oral storytelling, or even a true event. With the full history of Chief Cornstalk and what he was trying to do, would it be possible to send an omen or a monster or a creature to terrorize those out there who have seen this thing and proclaim it to be the revenge of what happened in this great land? I want to talk about a couple other cases that had become apparent with the whole Mothman phenomenon. And some of those cases were that of the Blackbird of Chernobyl, where an internet legend about a creature allegedly in the Ukraine area around the Chernobyl nuclear disaster power plant in the weeks leading up to the great disaster on April 26 of 86. Its description is very similar to the famous Mothman creature. The creature was allegedly hominid in appearance, and it can be presumed to have been black or dark gray in coloration. It was claimed to also possess wings and glowing red eyes. The Blackbird was supposedly sighted by several workers before they had perished. The story states the Blackbird served as an omen of doom, warning the workers of lethal radiation within the plant. Some of the earliest and the most earliest renditions of these reports go back to 2005, What I'm about to post to everybody are all reports, in quotes. I will leave you guys some links to check out down below. Version 1. Beginning in April of 1986, a rumor tore through the ranks of what was then a little-known nuclear power plant located in the southern tier of the Ukraine, Chernobyl. In the days preceding the tragic meltdown, 4 Chernobyl employees had reported seeing what they claimed was a large, dark, headless man with gigantic rings and fire eyes. Chernobyl employees began to share unsettling and strangely similar experiences. Some had been having horrific nightmares, while others received threatening phone calls, and according to both accounts, some of these employees even mentioned their bizarre experiences to their superiors at the facility, but without evidence or any clear-cut indication of what the problem may be, there is very little these officials could do, even had they been willing to take action. On April 26, 1986, during the routine test of Reactor 4, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was rocked by a massive explosion. 30 people died that morning, followed by 10 additional deaths due to the radiation exposure. And over the next 9 days, the graphite of the reactor continued to burn, resulting in tremendous environmental damage and an untold number of radiation casualties over the next 17-plus years. As the Soviet helicopters circled the smoldering plant, dropping over 500 pounds of clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals on top of the flames, some of the surviving workers, who at the sacrifice of their own lives, heroically struggled to prevent any further destruction, claimed to have witnessed what described to be a 20-foot bird gliding through the undulating tentacles of the irradiated smoke, which continued to sprue from the reactor. Version 2. Beginning in early April of 1986, the people in and around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a dark, large, mutated man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. People affected by this phenomenon experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls, and first-hand encounters with the winged beast, which became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. Reports of the strange happening continued to increase until the morning of April 26th of 1986, when at 1:23 a.m. Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant suffered a catastrophic steam explosion that resulted in a fire which caused a series of additional explosions followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located in Pripyat, Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout which drifted over parts of the Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland, and Eastern North America. Large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated and resulting in the evacuation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, was considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. But following the meltdown and other subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched to the scene equipped with special firefighting gear. Most of the fire was put out by 5 a.m., with the fire burning in a Reactor 4 continuing to blaze several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, and also the overdoses of radiation leading to many of their deaths. The workers who survived the initial blast and fire would later die of the radiation poisoning, claimed to have witnessed what was appeared to be the large black bird creature of a 20-foot wingspan, gliding through the swirling fumes of the irradiated smoke pouring from the reactor. No further sightings of the Black Bird of Chernobyl were reported after the reactor's incident, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers of the plant during the days leading up to disaster. One theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of a black stork, endangered species of an epidemic of southern Eurasia. Black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and the wingspan of nearly 6 feet. Theory, however, fails to take into account the menacing phone calls and disturbing nightmares, one of which have been described in Mothman reports. The legacy, while the story doesn't seem to appear in any known newsprint or book publication, although it's become well known all across the internet as sort of an online folklore or net lore, possibly a creepy story inspired by the already established trends. But of course, like every other mysterious mystery, it's unknown. So I want to get into the whole Chicago Mothman phenomenon, and this is basically the portion of the show that's going to be happening. This is currently reported sightings of the Mothman, and I'm going to be discussing them with you guys, as well as giving you guys my feedback. And these reports have been going on for nearly almost 10 years. I mean, starting in 2011, people were beginning to see the mysterious hominid known as the Mothman, recorded as a Chicago phantom in 2011. A married couple had taken a photograph of what reportedly was a photo of a Mothman, and it was dubbed as the Chicago Phantom. And ever since that photograph, there's been multiple reports throughout the current years of reported flying hominids seen in Chicago. What could it be? We don't know necessarily, and of course, for some out there, they don't know if it is the Mothman, what's it there for? Why is it here in a certain amount of time? So you have a lot of cases here where people are seeing this creature, and the explanation is, of course, like regulars in West Virginia, totally unknown. No one really gets an idea on what this thing is, and if anything, it's something of mystery, but what is it exactly? We don't know. It's one of those cryptids, or at least creatures, that we don't see in the press, but makes it simple because in 2011 there was a bit of a span. A lot of people were seeing the Mothman. According to the Mothman report of 2011, a couple in Chicago claimed to have taken a photo, or at least what is of a photo, of the supposed Mothman. The married couple were taking pictures with a smartphone on August 22, 2011 when they captured the image. They say they didn't spot the strange figure in the sky when they were snapping the pictures, but only noticed it when they were later going over the photos. The photographer claims that when he enlarged the photo, distinctively the bat-like wings became evident. And it's not the only case of such a creature that was sighted in Chicago. The evening of September 30th, 2011, students living in the area around the Miller Park and the University Park neighborhood of Chicago had a strange encounter. Two female students were getting dressed to go out that evening when they saw a pair of large round orange eyes peering at them through their window. Their third window floor, that is, of course. The women stood at their apartment, frozen in the shock as the creature hovered outside. They reported being overwhelmed in fear and felt like they were being eyed as prey. At least 6 other students in the area also reported the creature. They described it as being between 6 and 7 feet tall, dark gray to black in color with glowing eyes. They witnessed it ascend into the air and reported it as its huge wings made a whooshing sound when it flew. And the sightings continued. A young couple enjoying their evening walk on the night of October 14th also spotted the flying hominid. Hearing a commotion amongst a group of people, the couple looked up in the time to see what they described as a man with wings flying about 12 feet above them. One witness to the incident stated that the creature was perfectly silhouetted against the evening sky and reminded her of an immensely oversized sugar glider that she had seen back in her home in Tasmania, Australia. But they were nothing like the soft eyes of a glider, she said. These glowed red. They saw it for about 4 seconds before it disappeared from view. At first, they thought they were looking at a man in a hang glider, but those bloody eyes were that made to think over otherwise. So, much like the West Virginia sightings, you have these little small cases where people are seeing the Mothman, and now mind you, this is obviously 45 years later, so technology's advanced. There's no such thing back then as smartphones are now the thing. So you have technology that's capable of capturing things, but then you also have reports of people seeing this thing in modern civilization. And much like the Point Pleasant incident, while this creature was seen in a few different areas in residential community, this too happened. So the Chicago Phantom basically was, I think, the precursor, the starting of this infamous report of the Mothman seen in Chicago. And really, it's such an interesting case because when you look at Chicago's history and you think, what is this creature attached to in Chicago? And while we'll read into some more reports, it is very interesting to keep in mind that these encounters are still ongoing, that there are more reports as being processed throughout the year. And Lon Strickler and his team are doing that work as I'm looking through their maps, so all credit goes to them and his research. I think this is a very beneficial map because it helps showcase where the sightings are, and of course if you're a Chicago resident and happen to know of these reports, well, this is your opportunity to take a good look because this is something of interest. And I think for you out there who are of interest, of those who want to look at your locations of encounters. I think this is very beneficial, and I hope that we do see more maps are composed of these flying hominids. This next sighting took place in April of 2017 in Oz Park, Chicago, Illinois. Large hominid, probably 7 feet or taller, standing on the ground, was solid black, but what really stood out were the large pair of wings that were folded behind it. These wings stood taller than the humanoid by at least 1.5 feet and jutted out of his back. Witnesses could not see its face, as it had its face turned away from her. It finally turned and noticed her, and she saw the bright ruby eyes that appeared to glow from within. Sources go to the Phantoms and Monsters forum, the Mothman-like encounter in Chicago. This encounter took place in 2017, so a little while after 2011's Chicago Phantom sighting. On the 15th of April, that same year, Chicago International Produce Market in Chicago, Illinois, multiple witnesses reportedly saw a completely black, except it had bright yellowish reddish eyes like a cat. It stood there for a minute or two staring at everyone before shooting up into the sky and disappearing. Made everyone feel very uneasy, and only took off. Some guys threw some rocks at it. It had wings on it like an owl, only bigger, and you could hear it flap those wings when it took off. Sources come again from the Phantoms and Monsters forum. Another report seen in daytime. Of course, yet again, another very interesting case. The huge Yakuza owl-like hominid with glowing red eyes, seen the next day, April 16th. In Humboldt Park, Chicago, multiple witnesses. An owl-like hominid stood up on 2 feet and looked right at the witnesses. Looked like a huge Yakuza, except it was about 6 feet tall, and had large glowing red eyes. Another report on the 15th, going back a day. A bat-like flying hominid, 6 to 7 feet in body length, was solid black with eyes that seemed to reflect in the moonlight. Again, everything and scene reported here is from the Phantoms and Monsters forum, Lon Strickler and his team, as well as from the Mothman Dynasty, Chicago's Winged Hominid, the infamous book by Lon Strickler, as well as a good read. Go check it out. May 15th, 2017, at Calumet Park, law enforcement officer and his son witnessed by others in the park a flying hominid about 6 feet in height per witnesses' estimates. The blackish and grayish in color had an enormous pair of wings that must have been 8 to 10 feet in width. Yet again, another report of a flying hominid. On Saturday, June 3rd of 2017, approximately at 10 p.m., the couple had finished a late dinner at a local restaurant and noticed a flying anomaly as they were walking on the 400 block of N. Arlington Place. The streetlights illuminated the figure enough to startle them. It could have not have been very high above the street. Both witnesses described it as a 7 to 8 foot solid black hominid, and with wide membrane wings that resembled those of a huge bat. The wingspan was at least 12 feet. The head was prominent and thinner than a human head. The back end of the body tapered to a point. No legs were noticed, but it could have been tucked under the body. The figure was gliding along, and quickly the length of the street heading east, and then suddenly ascended into the night sky. Neither heard any sound, but both witnesses stated that they felt the sense of foreboding and were still terrified almost an hour after the encounter. A lot of things I'm noticing with all of these Chicago cases is that it appears that this creature wants to be noticed. And I know it kind of sounds a little ridiculous, but what I'm getting at is that in many of these cases, whether it was seen in a park or whether it was seen by a bunch of students or seen in some people who were walking along a block, this creature is being noticed in high prominent areas where back in Point Pleasant 66, this thing was in the TNT area. This thing was flying around side the bridge and was seen in several different small plateaus, and here it has more modern civilization where this thing is very visible. And I find it quite interesting because it's like, does it want us to see it? is this creature comfortable with us looking at it? Because people are looking at this thing, especially if you're walking on a street where there's a bunch of lights and there's street lights, there's cars, and you can't tell me that people in cars are not seeing this thing. So that makes you wonder about how intrigued that these sightings seem to be more modern and, of course, more public, whereas you would think cryptids would be staying hidden. Now, we've noticed this, too, in Dogman reports, where people have seen them in more civilized environments, such as in small back alleys and certain cut-throughs through the woods, small residential communities, for example. So that's another story, the large man with bat wings, that's been dubbed. Let's take another look at a couple other stories. There's a whole bunch, so I'll just read you guys down the list because they are quite interesting. You have another case known as the pair of large bat-like hominids. This happened in May of 2017 in the afternoon. Two large bat-like flying hominids downtown Chicago along the Chicago River near the confluence to Lake Michigan. Multiple witnesses saw these two flying hominids. So this goes on to say about the Mothman having more than one, that there's more than one cryptid of this so-called creature. There was a report in May as well of a flying hominid downtown Chicago. The river walk at the Columbus Drive Bridge, a large winged person flying above the water, then pulling up and going over the bridge. Looked like a huge owl or even a bat, but completely black with the exception of the two large eyes that appeared red. There's also a drawing, and much like everything else that's being credited tonight to Lon and his team, this drawing comes also from the Google Maps. You can take a look. This is an eyewitness's drawing sketch of what the Mothman, of what it looked like downtown. You have another case in May of 2017 involving a large black flying man with wings. The witnesses state that they first thought that it was a black helicopter because of the size, and through the distance it was not determined. The object then rose further in the sky and became apparent that it was a large human-like being with wings. Described it as black in color, and it was not flying around without moving its wings. Shocked at the size and silhouetted itself across the moon, which was visible in the late clear evening, there was still considerable light, but too dark to get a discriminable video or photograph on their cellular devices. Through that, there was an attempt to capture photographic evidence. They determined that it was not a plane or a glider, but a living being of unknown origin. Description by the woman that it looked like a large black flying man with wings. Giant red-eyed bat, Lakeview, Chicago, late May, 2017. Couple noticed something large, approximately 15 feet in the air and moving along at the brisk pace. Looked like a giant bat, only it was way larger and solid black. The object would have been almost solid black if it were not for the two glowing red eyes staring back at the witnesses. It flew overhead, circled back, and flew over the couple again before heading back toward the park. The object was far larger than anything that they had seen before, in and around the park and around the lake front. One of the eyewitnesses said that whatever it was not from this world, and that if it was undiscovered. The couple waited approximately 1 month before reporting this encounter. Another report of the large human-like bat, this time in June of 2017. A couple and multiple other witnesses observed a large black human-like bat-like creature flying over the food court at the Alder Planetarium. Described as a large bat-like creature that also had human-like features. Many of the witnesses stayed at the location for up to 30 minutes in case of the flying hominid returning. There was an extreme feeling of uneasiness among the people who were there. Another report of a tall, thin hominid with wings in late June of 2017. 2 Chicago police officers were flagged down by a group of residents in the neighborhood. A large creature that was approximately 6 to 6 feet tall and a hair feet, was very thin, and had been human, it would have been emaciated. Standing on top of the building and had what looked like a pair of very large wings that extended out at least 8 to 10 feet from tip to tip, no discernible features. It looked like a dark black shadow with wings. The officers shined their flashlights to try to get a better look, then the thing took off in the air and flew away. As the creature flew away, it headed in the southern direction. Something sounding like a scream came from it, and within the matter of about 5 seconds, this creature was gone into the night. People in the neighborhood had seen this thing from previous 2 nights, and this happened to be the only time that it was seen in a stationary place. Witnesses states that the being was definitely flesh and blood. Official report was filed with the Chicago Police Department. So, I wanted to talk about this case for a second because, again, this is one where there's a lot of action, and for some, I might think it's not too much action, but in terms of what we're getting as vocals. Now, as I've talked about in a couple of cases I mentioned prior, you're getting all these reports of people who are seeing this thing, and it's just more than one. You had one report prior to this about people who were at a food court and were having an uneasy feeling after seeing this creature. People have reported the nausea feeling when they've seen some paranormal activity, in which many do believe that with this has been the same with the Mothman, and even in the Dogman lore as well. But you also are dealing with a scenario here where people are reporting these cases, and it's not just your average day civilians who just, put on a red hat. It's actually police officers, like in this last report. You have people here who are seeing this thing in broad. They don't give a good description of the day and time. It's reportedly. Wait a second, hold on. My mistake. It does show the report. It's 11:15 p.m. This happened. So it's at nighttime. This neighborhood, more than 2 witnesses are seeing this thing. Before the cops shine the light on the creature, it flies up and it lets out a screech. One reported eyewitness said it was flesh and blood. We talk about the flesh and blood aspect of Dogman, while there's also flesh and blood aspect with the Mothman. Depending on, of course, which opinion and which theory could be validated, we don't know. But reportedly, to what one eyewitness had said, this was a flesh and blood animal and nothing more. Another report coming from a different portion of Chicago in the M. Milwaukee Ave, Logan Square, was dubbed the Owl Sighting. This happened in late June, a few days after that previous report, 10:30 p.m. The witnesses state that he was outside of this location leaning against a wall while smoking a cigarette, and he was alone at the time except a few other people walking along the street. He noticed a large bat-like creature flying above the streetlights approximately 60 to 70 feet away over the lot across the street. As the witness focused on the flying anomaly, he noticed that it was actually a bat-like hominid. The body was about 5 to 5.5 feet in length and grayish in color. Well illuminated by the streetlights, the head was human-like, but much thinner, and pointed crest extending from the back of its head, similar to a petrosaur but shorter. The head turned away from the witness so he could not see the eyes or the face, but the body tapered towards the back, and it looked like there were short legs or appendages tucked underneath, followed by a short rounded extension or tail. The wings had a full span of approximately 8 to 10 feet tall, and they were attached along the body. The wings were a bat-like membrane, but heavy, like that of a petrosaur. The witnesses noticed that the being flapped its wings to gain speed and height, and that it would glide. There was no sound. It was moving swiftly above the streetlights across N. Milwaukee Avenue, then burst out to other witnesses. He was not sure if there were other witnesses, though, since it flew by quick. You don't hear a case of a Mothman report of a hominid like that with a tail. Now, I want to just go ahead and say that I know I've been mentioning bat-like type creatures for the past several different reports, but as you'll note, and when you take a look at the map yourself, you'll notice that a lot of these are labeled as that because I don't think some of the cases might necessarily be Mothman, but they are dubbed as the flying hominids, or the winged hominid creatures. that have been sighted in Chicago. Now, of course, that might be like, well, could the Mothman, where does it attribute to because of the red eyes? A lot of people cite the red eyes and the wings and the creature itself. But I do believe, though, that these are all Mothman reports, that these are other Mothman variants that are being seen throughout the state of Chicago or the city of Chicago, my apologies, and you're seeing a scenario here where these people are seeing something that they can't explain. And it's not just 10 people, it's about maybe 20 people per day, maybe 30, 40 depending on it. And in a month, you have about almost 100 to 300 people who are seeing this creature in certain vicinities. Now that might make you wonder, well, why aren't these all 1,000 reports? Well, there's probably 1,000 reports, but really it just depends on, of course, where it comes down to and where it's being thrown. Late June, 11:15 p.m., about Auburn-Gresham neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois, the intersection West and 81st and South Throop Street. The witnesses were walking home from getting Wendy's with a small group of friends when one of their friends pointed at a dark shape in a tree at the corner of West 81st and South Throop. The thing was big, but details were hard to make out due to it being night. Then the thing jumped out of the tree and flew onto the roof of an apartment building on the same block, and when it flew, the witnesses got the chance to see that it was a tall, dark hominid with wide wings. The group of people had started to form on the corner and witnessing their friends. Some of the people flagged down a police car to point the thing out. A huge black shape in Albany Park, Chicago, Illinois. Gliding high over the Wilson-Kimball area, viewed a balcony about a half-mile north of the location, observed the gliding for about 2 minutes before it lost in the clouds heading south. It looked like a bat. Witnesses thought that it was at first, but it was just too big. It was hard to tell exactly how big from that distance, but the witnesses would guess at about an 8-foot wingspan. Many of the witnesses who saw this were spooked. In August of 2017, around 11:45 a.m., the witness was outside his work and looking skyward at the time. Being very high up, that the witness saw this creature high in the sky. Could tell that it was very big, but it was odd in shape, that it was at the height of a mid-flying airplane. States it looked just like the flying being in the pic from the first sighting in 2011. The distance that it was too high, and it was going away. The witness couldn't really tell what it was. The Lost Marsh Golf Course, a sighting that happened in July of 2017. A witness was heading home from his sister's house. His wife driving, the witness was in the passenger seat. The witness looked out his window and noticed 2 red lights in an area where there are no lights. He tells his wife that he had just seen 2 red lights and that he thought it was a little strange but nothing more. He had no strange feelings, but when he started to think of the 2 lights, they must have been over the water around 10 feet. The red lights were about 45-degree angle and kind of close to one another. That witness also takes that route all the time and that there is no light pole or anything in that area, just water. This happened in late August of 2017 in the Forest Park. The following report happened at 8:45 p.m. This is from a retired police officer that resides in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was visiting his mother on Sunday, the 27th of August, at a residence in the Forest Park suburb of Chicago, Illinois, when at approximately 8:45 p.m., he volunteered to walk his mother's dog before he left the drive home to Michigan. His mother's caregiver usually did this task. As he walked west on Jackson Boulevard in front of the Howard Moore Community Center, he noticed something crouched on the roof behind the facade of the building next door to the community center, going west. And since it was dusk and that there was a bit of light coming from a street light, the witness was unable or at least at this time, to get a good view, but upon going closer was able to observe whatever it was. He had stopped walking and was 50 or so feet away from it when he described it as a dark gargoyle that was looking directly at him. The dog, a standard poodle, was restless and began to bark. The being stood up and made a growling-like sound, very guttural and menacing, and the witness noticed that the eyes were small but distinct reddish glow, that had the body shape similar to that of a human man, but gaunt and dark gray in color. There were large wings folded outward from its back, very similar to the typical image of a gargoyle, but much larger. The height was around 6 feet or so. The head was somewhat conical and small compared to the rest of the body. It had long arms with claw-like hands and swayed back and forth in front of the being. After watching for about 10 to 15 seconds, he also had to maintain the control of this dog, which was barking and pulling out on the lead. The wings snapped from the back and being spread out of a full span. The wings were very distinct with a dark membrane covering. He estimated that the span was about 15 feet and extended high above the being. Then the being's wings dropped to its side and quickly propelled itself into the air, heading south in the direction of the metro station. It made no sound as it ascended. A very interesting detailed encounter involving a retired officer. This guy was walking his mother's dog when he had seen this creature on top of a building crouched down, and as a result, the dog, and in many cases with cryptids, dogs will either be nervous or dogs will react negatively. In this case, the dog was reacting in a negative manner. This creature, this Mothman creature, reportedly had growled. Now, this is an interesting report because you have a case here where you never hear, and I believe a Mothman can do the same thing a dogman can do in terms of behavior, growl, moan, screech, and the case with the people in the building, the creature flying away and screeching. Vocalizations, too, most likely, in a certain way. Telepathic-wise, I don't know. But what I'm getting at is that with the sense of this, it's another case, and they defined it as a dark gargoyle, which is pretty interesting when you look at it, and of course, the dark gargoyle and whatever it is. Another good case, nonetheless. Take another look at a case of a red-eyed winged hominid. This happened in Forest Park. Again, another Forest Park, Chicago incident. This one was in February of 2018, around 11 p.m. The eyewitness goes on to say that I was walking toward my apartment with my best friend and another girlfriend after getting off the Green Line train. It was about 11 p.m. on Friday, February 2nd, 2018. We were right next to the parking lot next to the YMCA when we saw something land across the street from us, and the street light gave it some illumination along the moonlight, and it looked like a tall man, but it had a very large black pair of wings. Now, I know we had been drinking a bit, but I was sober enough to know what it really was, and the reality of it being a hallucination was far from confirmed. Besides, seeing this thing was enough to make people scare alone sober, in a heartbeat. Seeing a man with wings was already freakily enough strange, but when we saw what only could be described as its eyes, it sent a chill down my body. The eyes were bright red and seemed to glow from within. It looked at us for maybe 5 seconds before it spread its wings as wide as they could and apparently started to flap. Then they slowly gained altitude, flapping those wings faster and faster until it was above the building and gone. We could not get back to our apartment fast enough. Once inside, we closed and bolted the door shut. This is a very interesting case. This one happened in 2006. This is actually, I think, a prelude to all of the other cases, and this one occurred in 2006 of July, the 15th and 16th. Now, this is from the eyewitness testimony. I'm going to read you in the eyewitness's fashion in the way it's written. My husband and I were in a process of moving from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to the small area between Whitewater and Eagle, Wisconsin. was about 9:30 p.m. when there was a bright full moon in the clear sky. We were traveling down Highway 59 East past Eagle, turning on to Road X, a somewhat desolate stretch. A thin band of trees that are on each side of the road with open fields behind them. The area is about 18 miles approximately east of Whitewater, located between Eagle and North Prairie, Wisconsin. My husband was driving and his two young children in the back seat, I believe asleep. Suddenly swooping over the trees on our left, lowering down in front of the car windshield, then upwards again on the treetops to our right, gliding at a slow ascent over the field, was what I was described to me, or what I believe was a man bat-like creature with those mysterious-looking bat-like features. This creature was as real as you and I are. We had a very close-up look at it. It was long, 6 or 7 feet in length, and I say length because it was flying sideways, looking into the car, much like the side stroke. It was a dark gray, very leathery skin, one-winged, kinda tucked into its side, the one facing the ground and the other flapping while it flew. The wing was huge, exactly like a bat's. But what got me the most were the eyes. They were very round, where the whites would be, looked ruminy, the best way to describe it. The irises were of a very pale blue. I was not afraid. I was astounded, amazed, and even very excited. My husband was shook up and would not stop when I asked him to. The kids were in the car. One of the earliest reports of Mothman-like material in the Chicago, Wisconsin area. Friday, October 26, 2018, though, however, another report of a winged hominid seen in Chicago once again. The report was submitted by an older couple who work as an over-the-road team for trucking companies in Alsip, Illinois. They both have been driving together for over 15 years and have been married for over 27. The gentleman was at the wheel of the truck when the encounter occurred, and his wife was the passenger in the seat. They both agreed to have the story submitted, but asked that their names be kept confidential due to the nature of their work, and in fact, they did not want someone from their company who was based in Alsip, Illinois, to find out about their sighting. This following sighting is reported as follows, with all previous information ascended from Lon and his discussion. This is the following testimony from the eyewitnesses. They wish to remain anonymous, as mentioned. We were on our way to park our truck at the yard after being on the road for 2 weeks. As we approached the railroad track crossing, we noticed something standing in the middle of the road and thought it was a homeless person walking along the tracks. We popped on the high-intensity lights, and to our surprise, it was not a homeless person at all. This thing looked like a large owl, as it had what looked like feathers and a flat, rounded face with large eyes that reflected the LED lights of our truck. This thing appeared to lunge at us while trying to cover its eyes with its left arm, or what we thought was an arm. I pulled on the air horn, and this thing turned its back on us and then took a couple of steps and then took off into the air and flew off into the night. We were left sitting there in complete shock as we watched it disappear into the evening. After a minute or two, looking to see if the damn thing would come back around, we continued into the yard. We parked our truck and walked toward the car, and as we were almost at the car, we heard what sounded like a scream followed by another, then silence. We hustled our tails to the car and left for home. The area where the sighting is heavily industrialized with a few residential areas nearby. The railroad crossing mentioned sits approximately 3.75 of a mile from the entrance and surrounded by the wooded area on the west 122nd Street and is across the street from the Coca-Cola plant. I accompanied the couple to the location of the sighting, and I will be posting information in the location in the future. Reportedly, this was an ongoing investigation. I haven't, looking at some of the files, there appears to be no further update. Again, I'm reading this from Lon as he goes down in the narrative of it. So basically, this couple is a trucking couple, and they see this creature at the dead of night, and it flies up. What believes to have been the creature covering its face. Could it have been, disturbed by the bright lights, the high beams? Absolutely. But of course, letting out a screech like that, many people have been very well aware of the situation at bay with that, and how this creature applies to it. I do apologize if I kind of caught you guys off guard with that one sighting. It is a pretty huge, when I was reading over it, so I do apologize. Now, here is another report, this time in Indianapolis. This is how the description goes. A friend of mine just sent me an article on sightings about the hominid-type flying creature in Indiana. It had written on it about a recent sighting of this thing, and my girlfriend and I both witnessed the same creature about 6 years ago, in the summer of 2012. This was, of course, written testimony in 2018. They go on to say, while traveling to I-465 North headed towards the Indianapolis International Airport around 3 a.m., the creature, dubbed as the Mothman, as we've been calling it, flew right in front of our windshield. It soared between two buildings and came right in front of the taxi van. I was on a cab fare. It turned its head and looked right at us with little red eyes. It then flapped its wings one time and flew to the left really fast. The thing was, the wings were so beautiful. Never forget how amazing they were. It was a very bat-like being. You could almost see through its wings. You could see the veins bulging from all angles of the wings and the light that illuminated through them in the background. And I'll never forget the eyes. They were piercing and felt as if they looked right into my soul. It was definitely a very deep feeling. As you know how the funny thing was? Even though that this massive thing flew so close in front of the van, I felt I was going to hit him. I never once put my brakes on, and I think back about that and why I didn't, a lot. I mean, I'm a taxi driver with a chauffeur license trained to be safe and cautious, yet I never once slammed on my brakes or attempted to stop. Very interesting report, and the guy was a chauffeur, and still is, I believe, and had this report of this Mothman creature, and it sounds as if he had a very spiritual experience, the way he has it written. And you guys, for everybody out here who is listening to this and would like to know where all these reports are coming from, this is coming from the flying hominid map that was constructed by Lon Strickler and his UFO team. And a very phenomenal job of this. It has all of the events, and it has all of these reports from the first to now. And you have a huge series of reports of people seeing things they can't explain. And you have, in this case, a guy who has a very spiritual experience with something that he believes to be something totally abnormal. So I want to talk and take a look at another case. This was a recent case in February of 2019. We're getting to the bottom end here. There's some cases I haven't really read, but if you guys are interested, you can take a look at the map and read all the cases, but I've read you guys a lot of them tonight, and we're going to continue reading them. We're going to read you a few more, but this is another one. This is a large dark-winged hominid. This was around February 2019 at 10:30 p.m. The eyewitness states that he was driving into the town on his way to work when he had seen a dark figure the size of an adult human leap from the tree and fly across the sky over the road. He slammed on his brakes and watched this massive creature fly into the nearby wooded area. And he tried to get pictures, but because it was too dark out, this creature appeared to be jet black in color and nothing was visible in the photos. Eyewitness lives in Clayton, Michigan, and works in Adrian, and where they saw the creature was about halfway between the two towns, and the towns are only a 20-minute drive apart. This is down the southeast Michigan, about 30 minutes drive, Michigan and Ohio state line. So if we're all seeing the same creature, it's definitely migrating. Makes you wonder, because now we're transitioned out of the Chicago area and have now went to Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio. Ohio was also a notorious site for the Mothman back in the 60s. So, do they migrate? Of course. But at the same time, you don't really get a lot of reports, and I think that's what really distracts people when they think, oh, well, is it in this area, but it is, or not, or whatever. This next report is from the Singular 14 Society. According to the message received from the Singular 14 Society's contact page, the eyewitness was outside the Jewel Osco in Woodstock, Illinois, and believed to have seen the same visual of an unusual being in the McHenry County Fairground. It screeched at me, then charged the fence. About 30 feet from the fence, it had very bright green eyes and had wings, was all black leatherly colored, ran back towards the woods in the McHenry County Fairgrounds. I called the police department, and the county sheriffs responded to the location. The investigator, Tobias Whalen, attempted to contact the witness via telephone at the predetermined time agreed by all parties, but was forced to leave a voicemail. The witness has not yet responded. The Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA, request of any information pertinent to the incident was then filed with the McHenry County Sheriff's Office. While an official report was not written, the 911 call information was released. According to the incident, the detailed report documenting the call at 2:46 a.m. on the 28th of February, officer responded to the 911 call of a man who said he had seen a mysterious creature described as a being 7 to 8 feet tall, wearing all black, that charged at him from the fairground, screeching at him while he was at the jewel lot, and then it retreated. The witness named the creature the Duffield Pond Swamp Monster, and since he had had the first sighting with the police involvement, the report continued, and the investigation is still currently ongoing. And like every other report of this mysterious Mothman creature in Chicago, there is definitely a mysterious phenomenon, one of a force that we can all not understand, one cannot reckon, and one that we ourselves do not know 100%. Now, much like all the reports I talked to you guys about tonight, this again another reported of the Mothman phenomenon, the Mothman creature. And I noticed in a lot of the Chicago reports, a lot of the Chicago, Illinois, and Wisconsin, Michigan reports, you're dealing with a creature here that is basically, in a fashion, being seen by the public. The public is literally seeing this creature, and no one is saying a single thing about it. Well, they are, but in terms of not really bringing the adjacent angle to it. And what I mean by the adjacent angle is that you have people have multiple eyewitnesses seeing this thing, and this creature is being seen by multiple witnesses, and there's no real logical explanation for why. It's curiosity that bites the eye, but I think it's just interesting how this creature or creatures have almost evolved and don't care if people see it or not. And maybe I'm just overthinking it, but I just find it fascinating. You had reports of blue eye shine, orange eye shine, red eye shine, green eye shine, and even some reports were there of some purple eye shine. And it's odd because then you have some eye colors that are wide, some eyes that are not wide, they're actually narrow. So it showcases that are these creatures, are there different Mothmen, or can the Mothman shapeshift? And can he change different forms? Which definitely opens up a whole new realm of opportunity and understanding me. But at the same time, I think that's too much to say in such a high compacted scenario. So, with this being said, the Chicago Mothman, I'm going to give you guys my final thoughts on what the Chicago Mothman is before I give you guys my overall opinion on the creature. And then we'll wrap up the show. You have a hominid here, a mysterious hominid that one cannot explain, one that I think you can put into a room and try to get an understanding out of, but note that there's not much coming out of it. Nothing can be done. And there's no real explanation on what the Mothman is. There's no explanation on what the flying hominids seen throughout Chicago are, because, again, they're a cryptid. They're a cryptid, and as like one eyewitness statement reported, that it definitely was out of its world, or out of our world, of whatever it was. Then you got another eyewitness saying that it was a flesh and blood animal, that it was 100% flesh and blood. So you have all of these differences of opinion that really do strike a huge force of understanding. And people who excalibrate, or at least kind of get the idea, it's hard to build an opinion on something that has not enough evidence, information. While there's been multiple books written, much like Dogman and Bigfoot, you know, you could write 1,000 books, but how many books come also with 1,000 theories? And then, of course, when 1,000 theories are launched, then there's 1,000 debates and opinions, and it becomes 1,000 arguments. So how do we know what every piece of information that's being said about this cryptid is indeed genuine and that it's true? Now, this is where my inner skepticism comes in, and I'm not here to be a skeptic. I'm not here to insult nobody. I'm not insulting any of those who are deceased, ongoing researchers, or anything. That's not what I'm about, and you guys know me long enough to know that that's not what I do on the show. But as somebody who is of curiosity, if this is an abnormal, a supernatural creature lurking in Chicago, what is its purpose? And that's when we talk about the whole omen of doom situation, right? Where we believe that the Mothman is an omen of doom, and that it has some sort of omen ability. And at the time of this recording, there was just recently a tragedy in Chicago where people were killed. And we talk about the prophecy, or at least the whole omen of doom, like I just mentioned. You know, you have a scenario here where people are curious to know what the Mothman is, but it's seen before tragedy, and is this a case of the Mothman here in the site of a tragedy? Was it being seen through Chicago to warn of the coming pandabellum that's to be in the state of Chicago and throughout the surrounding aspects, such as Wisconsin, Ohio, everywhere? You had eyewitnesses who were said that they had an uneasy feeling, nausea feeling. Why is that? So there's a lot that, you know, you put into retrospect, and you really got to see it for what it is. And I don't think a lot really will see it, because it is, of course, a tough scenario when you're dealing with these type of cases, or at least what you believe to be cases with creatures like the Mothman and whatnot. But it's still a very interesting topic, one of interest and scary phenomenon. And I use the word scary because it really, it makes you wonder. So, with that being said on Chicago, there's going to be links in the description down below if you guys are interested in taking a look at Chicago and everything it lasts for in terms of sightings. And once again, a big shout out goes to Lon Strickler and his UFO team for constructing that map, for having all the documented sightings. Take a look at the Mothman Dynasty, a book by Lon Strickler, and take a look at the Phantoms and Monsters forum. We've credited the Phantoms and Monsters forum for many Dogman reports. Very good website. And thank you, Lon, and your team for what you guys do. Much love to you. So I want to talk about this case in Nevada that happened with a guy who saw the Mothman, because this was a very interesting case that happened. And like many cases that we discussed tonight that have very good interest, this one was a little different, because the description was basically almost as if it was faceless, but at the same time it was pretty early morning hours, and it was also this individual was in a bit of a hurry, and we'll go into that into the story in just a second. But let me know what you guys think. There have been reports of Mothman seen in Nevada. Reports have been going back since the 80s of people who've seen these things in the desert. People have seen them in Arizona desert. Have seen them in Texas. So they've been proceeded to be seen all throughout. And there's a lot of unknown information to why this situation of why they're being seen in these temperatures, because there have been very few cases where people have seen cryptids and hot temperatures, and I'm not saying anything in the case of it not being believable, because it is, but it's just quite interesting how a lot of the migration periods, because you would think that these cryptids would find themselves in environments that are dense and forest regions, and then of course they're seen in desert-like areas, which makes you wonder. So I want to talk to you guys about this encounter. This encounter was pretty interesting, because this guy had seen no face, basically, just smoke gray and wings, and stood and looked at least 7 feet, no more. This comes from the Texas UFOs sightings.com website. I'm going to leave the article in the description down below, like everything we're going to be leaving tonight. And take a look into this, because this is pretty interesting. The following eyewitness testimony goes on to say, and I follow: I was driving on Nevada Highway 160 going north about a mile marker 134 and 35 when I saw this thing land in front of my car in the street. In my travel lane, I didn't know what it was. It was a clear sky, no wind, no clouds on the August 27th, 2018. I was a little behind my schedule, so I had just finished a small snack and was listening to some music, and then suddenly this thing came up from high, and I couldn't even see any eyes, no face, and it was landing. The wings were out to each side of it once. It was on the ground. It wrapped its wings around itself as if it was bracing for an impact. The wings were wrapped around its front. It put its head down slightly and just stood there. It would not move as I approached it, and the only thing I can think is what it is that I cannot crash my car. I cannot hit this thing. It will destroy my car and put me in the hospital. So I said no and turned my wheel slightly to the left. I did this 4 times as I took my foot off the accelerator to slow my speed as I passed this thing. I did not look in my rearview mirror, but it was too dark to see anything. I didn't stop because I didn't know what it was, and I didn't want it to come after me. I just kept saying out loud, "What is that? What was that? What was that?" over and over. Where did it come from? For what is it? Its body was like a human. Its wings and arms were one unit. It was a car in front by about half a mile, and behind me by about a half a mile. I don't know if anyone else saw it or not. I would like to know if anyone else has seen it. I look for it every day and wonder where it came from. So this is a very interesting case, because this guy was just driving and he had seen this creature, and it had gotten down, like leveled down to his car, and he was about to crash, and then he made the shift into the next lane. So he was basically, whatever it was, this thing for some reason just wanted to come near him, I guess, and it was just, I guess, drawn by his car. And it appears that he wasn't the only one on the main road, highway at least, so it is something of interest, and it truly, for a report like this, because when you look at the photograph, you see this description, this sketch, and he had his high beams on. So mind you, the high beams are throwing out an extra set of lights that have illuminated the road so bright that you can probably see 50 feet away, nearly closest the nearest sign. So, really, he had a good view of whatever he was, of course, looking at. And in the way the sketch looks, it just looks like he had seen what appeared to have been, the Mothman. So, could there be Mothmen that, of course, have no face or no illumination of eyes or whatever? And could they be phantoms? Could they be something of a supernatural presence when they do that, in which I believe? But who knows? That's something of a very good interest. But I just wanted to throw that last report out there, because I want to let you know, what do you guys think? What would be, of course, in your belief, what would be the report that would really stand out to you the most, in fascination-wise? Because that also, too, is yet again another case of a Mothman-like situation that was pretty interesting, especially in the state of Nevada. So I want to go ahead and transition into the skepticism part of the show, in which we're going to be talking about the skeptic part of what a Mothman is, why many people have had different views of opinion on the skeptic part, and why they are skeptic. I think for many people back in the 60s when this was going on, there was this huge hysteria, and it wasn't just being pressed in newspapers throughout Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the West Virginia state. It was being posted all throughout the country. So you had people in New York and people in California who were looking at newspaper printings of this mysterious Mothman cryptid that was terrorizing this town in Point Pleasant. So at this time, different states had different viewpoints and opinions because they were getting the buzz of news too. Now, some states were familiarized with cryptids and some states were familiarized and were not with cryptids. And, this is kind of that portion where people will build a different opinion because they don't necessarily believe in the right instinct or what appears to be the right belief. So for a lot of people, there was a group of many who felt that this was just a prankster who was, wore a mask and happened to have lights or something that looked like lights dawn upon him and go out at night and just scare people. Now, for the flying aspect, there were many people who believed that, and to be quite frank with you, it would kind of be one of those things in the sci-fi scenario where people felt that this dude was instantly had some sort of, he was parachuting in a sense, or he was gliding, that this was a gliding individual or somebody who happened to use that. But then, and this was applied to people who were seeing it during the day. That what appeared to be what looked like wings was that actually of a glider. Now, I don't necessarily think gliders were as mainstream and relevant as much as they are today, back in the 60s, or at least what I would appear to be. I mean, again, depending on how you see it in the time period. But really, too, I mean, it just doesn't, for somebody to be a prankster doing that, how do you explain the Scarberry incident? And then skeptics would go on to say, well, maybe they made that part up. Maybe the scratches were done by them. Maybe there was a prankster, but to really make a convincing story, go and furthermore exaggerate it. But at the same time, I mean, how do you explain the Marcella Bennett case? How do you explain the Tom Urey case with the Mothman? He saw helicoptering him. How do you explain that? How do you explain all those cases of where people have seen this thing and have had subsequent nightmares? Which made me believe that this thing is an angel of death or an omen of an anomaly of doom. So how do you explain that? How do you go ahead and you tell people that, oh, it's a prankster, but how do you also keep intact all these other situations? But then again, you can go ahead and be skeptical about it because you can say, well, what if people just want to make things up just for the sake of it? Because the Silver Bridge collapse wasn't the Mothman. The Silver Bridge collapse was because of an eye bar. And as a result, I mean, that of course, it compromised that, but it wasn't done in a supernatural kinetic sense, maybe. But how can a prankster be able to fly at high altitudes like that? And everybody, I guess, would come forth. But it's just very mysterious in many people. And of course, furthermore, it is one of those things where it could be a costume prankster. But even if that was the case, there are some things that, but a prankster doing that, who knows? Now, being mistaken for another animal, that has been known. Ornithologists well know some bird eyes shine bright red at night when caught in a beam from auto headlights or flashlight. This eye shine is not the iris color that one authority has explained one point, but that it has the vascular membrane, the tapetum, showing through the translucent pigment layer on the surface of the retina. And this was from an article of Gill in 1994. Now, for many people who have often worked in the area or have questioned and said that there's many owls in the area. Now, the McClintock management area does have a lot of nutrients, surprisingly. People may have mistaken these owls for bigger owls, perhaps the Mothman being a big owl. And skeptics have often argued that it is indeed an owl or a hawk or some crow, and because of what was explained and what's said about the eye shines. I mean, we've also had this too in dogman cases with eye shine. I've seen red-eyed deer, I've seen red-eyed raccoon. It's possible for the same thing. Now, skepticism-wise, of course, when it comes to the Mothman, how does it fly so fast at high altitude? Well, a giant owl with a wingspan, it could have at least 5 feet, 7 feet, maybe more. The giant owls, it could have fast agility, going no more, maybe 50 miles per hour, perhaps more than that. But could it be an owl? I don't necessarily think so. Maybe the more logical could be the sandhill crane, and the sandhill crane has been often reported in many cases and has been said before to be maybe the Mothman because of the way it's shaped. It has the giant legs, it has the giant wings, and at night it illuminates to that red eyes shine on its stomach because of its reddish look when it glides. So it could be. Many people may have, in skepticism places, may have believed it to be that, and they could be or they could be right, but that's be left up for debate. Now, when it comes to the conclusion of skepticism, there's not much you can really imply. There's only a little bit of bits and pieces, the bits of bullet holes that you can kind of throw into junction. But, I mean, if it is a prankster, the prankster is done a fantastic job, but then how can you explain the other incidents all throughout the world, unless it's become an underground organization that's criminally industrialized, but I strongly doubt that. And then, of course, when it comes to the owls and other birds in the charts, it could be a giant owl, but at the same time, it's hard to also explain, again, being seen throughout the world, and then all these disasters seem to happen. So it's almost like it's a bit more of conspiracy than it is of what a cryptid is. So, and as for the sandhill crane, it could be the most logical, but at the same time, the sandhill crane, many of cases, again, going back to it. But if there's one that could be a skepticism that I would believe, it would be the sandhill crane. So I want to go ahead and, besides talk on the skeptic region, I want to also make clear mention of a couple things that truly do stand out to me and I also found interest in. And one of that, of course, is the whole theory of government interference when it comes to the Mothman cases. A lot of people believe that the men in black were actually just following the protocol of a typical alien-like creature life form, and were actually government officials just, in the town of Point Pleasant. People were getting approached by these guys in West Virginia around that time. There were reports of MIBs all throughout during the duration of the Mothman phenomenon, and even reports going as far back as even people having mysterious occurrences with government officials, even in duration of the early 60s around this time. So it makes you wonder, the Mothman beforehand, before the sightings, the earlier sightings, was this all just a play around? Did the government happen to know that these creatures were here beforehand? I mean, it's one of those whacked out conspiracies, but many people were under the impression that that is also the men in black are government officials. Then it comes into the whole genetic experiment discussion, where people believe that the Mothman is a genetic experiment. It was tested in a lab, most likely Plum Island, and was an escaped creature, or it was a creature that was a failed experiment, was meant to be executed, and then brutally was left for dead and survived somewhere and has now become the infamous Mothman. So it definitely goes against the cornstalk curse, and for many people out there and skeptics who believe it to be a genetic experiment, and that it has some sort of telepathic intelligence, which I believe, and which would be classified as a supernatural creature, but for some people out there, they would see it as it has enhanced intelligence, of course, following genetic testing. But that's left up for debate as well. But I want to just take a couple minutes to give my opinion, and personally, I'm not going to go any further with it. It's going to be quick, because, discussing the Mothman case, you have this case of a cryptid, a creature that you have no idea what it is. And when you look at it, you hear it could be a supernatural creature, or it could be a flesh and blood creature. In the cases that we talked about tonight, it's been divided down the line between supernatural and flesh and blood. But then how do you explain all the mysterious occurrences that go on and so forth? I personally believe that the Mothman is a supernatural creature. I don't think it to be a flesh and blood animal. It could be flesh and blood in a sense. There could be animals like that. I'm not saying that, there could be a few different variants, and there could be ones that could be. But the one as whole, I don't think any of these could be possessed as a normal flesh and blood. They do have a supernatural ability. I think in the cases in Point Pleasant were supernatural. I believe it was an omen of doom. I believe that any creature, any paranormal entity that has the capabilities of not just sitting there and having a fright fest with an eyewitness, but also to have the ability to enforce a poltergeist or a paranormal event, a premonition, a signing of doom. Any animal that can do that is above and all frightening. And it's a truly very scary experience, because, you don't know what this thing is. We don't know what this thing is. I think we've reached this point in our research where, even though you have researchers who've been in the field for 25 years researching it, there's a lot of background for it. There's not a lot of clarification and a lot of declassified information that could be prominent. We can only go by the testimony, go by the books that have been illustrated on it, and simply what has been written by researchers who have been studying it since day one. You could ask locals, I bet, in Point Pleasant what they think. I'm sure if you go to the Mothman Museum and get an opinion, but everybody's going to be split on it. And I believe it's an omen of doom. I believe it's a supernatural creature. I believe this creature has abilities that we have no idea can possess and can outmatch our abilities as a human being, which is a scary thought when you think about it, but that's what I believe it could be. There's no other way I think I can put it besides that. And I know it's not the most logical answer for many, but I feel that there's too many hypotheses and theories out there that aren't necessarily adding up and just going by what previous testimonies have said, or ways to confuse us more. But why it could be an omen of doom, preferably because even if you omit the UFO cases, you have something here that has the stronghold, right? The monstrosity, the ability that it has some sort of connection with people. And while many eyewitnesses have basically stated in the past of people feeling this presence by it, this fear factor to it, there always happens to be the case where you can have a dream. You dream and you happen to see this creature there. You happen to have a whole bunch of things happen in this dream. You have no explanation why. Then, of course, months or so later, it ends up, something happens, and then it comes full circle. A lot of people don't see that. A lot of people, I think, when it comes to the whole aspect of a creature, when it appears in dreams, that there is that connection, a supernatural vibe. I mean, it could be a good or bad, but when you're having premonitions, or at least a thought that something bad's going to happen, like a sixth sense, there is some connection there, supernatural-wise, I believe. I think it's been well put in literature. It's been well put in, I think, movies, But, in contrast, I think that this creature does possess an omen of doom aspect to it, for the sake being that this creature is seen in duration, and then beforehand a disaster happens. And it definitely makes you wonder, So for that being said, folks, I appreciate you guys listening into this episode. This is probably one of my longer pre's, and I do apologize for the wait. To be honest with everybody, coming back to do the show, but then you get hit with a lot of stuff to do in your personal life. It does get to you. And I'm not saying that I'm not qualified or I still want to do the show. I do. And it just, you got to take your practice. And I appreciate everybody's patience. I know that there's many who get PO'd with it. I know there's many that really seem to question if I really want to do a fascination with it. But, at the end of the day, everybody's got a life. But behind the microphone, I have a life. So I appreciate everybody's patience, and you guys are great. I can't thank you guys enough for waiting on, and hope you guys enjoyed the episode. It's definitely a different episode, and we're going to be continuing doing that for the subsequent weeks. And while this is the first of many, we want to go ahead and branch out and not just talk Dogman. I think you guys would like it. So with that being said, folks, one more time for us all, if you would like to check out some links, if you'd like to get in contact with me, you can send me an email at thevenomoussfringe@gmail.com. If you would like to join a couple groups, such as our Dogman group or our Venomous Fringe official group, there are links down below. And also, too, guys, if you would like to help support the show, we are not doing YouTube's partnership. Feel free to leave us a donation PayPal link down below if you're able to help us with funds. And please check out the links of the Chicago map and the Nevada case. I'll be leaving a few subsequent links down there as well for you guys. And with that being said, I hope you all have a fantastic evening and take care.